He survived the streets, viral fame, cage fights, and critics who said he'd never make it. And then, 2016, Kimbo Slice is rushed to a Florida hospital, his heart failing just weeks before his next fight. Fans stunned, the fighting world in disbelief. Was it the wear and tear of a body pushed past its limits, hidden health issues, or the price of a life lived too hard, too fast? He had fame, he had enemies, he had secrets, and no one saw it coming. So how did the most famous street fighter in history, the man who brought MMA to the mainstream, end up gone at just 42? To understand, we have to rewind. Kevin Ferguson was born in Nassau, Bahamas in 1974. By the time he was a child, his family relocated to Miami, Florida, and the city would shape everything he became. Miami in the late 1970s and 80s wasn't paradise. It was survival. For young Kevin, fights were constant, poverty was inescapable, and trouble was always close. He was nicknamed Slice in childhood after using a blade to defend a friend in a street fight. A hint at how violence and protection would define his reputation. From an early age, Kevin stood out physically, strong, intimidating, athletic, but inside, he was more complex. A quiet, thoughtful young man who loved football and dreamed of making it out of the streets through sports. He became a linebacker at Miami Palmetto High, fierce on the field, but his family's financial struggles kept him tethered to street life. Despite flashes of hope, like a football scholarship to Bethune-Cookman University, he never made it to the NFL. Instead, when opportunities fell through, he bounced between low-paying jobs: bouncer, limo driver, bodyguard. It was in those Miami streets, working security and hustling odd jobs, that Kevin became Kimbo. The beard, the glare, the aura, it wasn't a gimmick. It was armor. For every brawl he survived, his legend grew. He was feared, respected, and whispered about in street corners long before the world ever saw his fists on camera. And yet, even as violence became his calling card, friends said he was gentle with his children, soft-spoken at home, and fiercely protective of those he loved. Kimbo Slice was being forged, half myth, half man, and all fight. The internet was still young in the early 2000s when Kimbo Slice exploded into global consciousness. Grainy VHS to digital clips began circulating online of brutal, bare-knuckle backyard fights. In these raw showdowns, held behind houses, in alleys, or makeshift lots, Kimbo Slice was the immovable force. His hulking frame, bald head, and iconic black beard gave him a terrifying silhouette. But what set him apart was his power. Punches that folded men in half, knockouts that left crowds gasping. These videos spread like wildfire, passed around on early forums, and burned onto CDs. Before YouTube even existed, Kimbo was the first viral fighter. Millions watched his brawls, stunned by the sheer intensity. In these fights, there was no glamour, no referees, no sanctioned rules, just raw survival. Kimbo's reputation grew beyond Miami. He wasn't just a local legend anymore, he was a global curiosity, a man who looked like he belonged in gladiator times, resurrected in the digital age. But here's the contradiction. Behind the fearsome image, Kimbo was approachable. In between fights, he'd crack jokes, smile for fans, and carry himself with humility. Even in his viral clips, when the chaos subsided, you could see him helping fallen opponents, making sure they were okay. This balance, monster in the ring, gentleman outside it, became a key to his myth. Soon, mainstream media came calling. Documentaries, sports outlets, and promoters realized there was money in the Kimbo phenomenon. Was he just a street fighter, or could he cross over into professional combat sports? Millions wanted to know. Kimbo's rise wasn't gradual, it was explosive, fueled by both fascination and controversy. He was either the future of fighting or a freak sideshow, depending on who you ask. But one thing was undeniable: people couldn't stop watching. By 2007, Kimbo Slice had made the leap from street legend to professional fighter, signing with Elite XC. This was no small gamble. Could a man with no amateur pedigree, no Olympic background, and only viral brawls under his belt succeed in the cage? Critics scoffed, but fans tuned in, and that was all promoters cared about. Kimbo's professional debut came against Ray Mercer a former boxing world champion. Though it was only an exhibition, Kimbo stunned many by submitting Mercer with a guillotine choke. Suddenly, the idea that Kimbo could be more than a spectacle seemed possible. His official pro debut soon followed against former UFC fighter Tank Abbott. Abbott, once the baddest brawler of the early UFC days, was tailor-made as Kimbo's foil. The fight ended exactly as fans hoped, Kimbo knocking Tank out cold, cementing himself as a new kind of fighting attraction. Elite XC leaned all the way in. Kimbo became their face, headlining televised cards that drew record-breaking numbers. In 2008, his fight with James Thompson on CBS drew over 7 million viewers, a staggering figure that proved Kimbo wasn't just a sideshow. He was a mainstream star. His persona, the chain, the beard, the scowl, was money. His fights, even if technically raw, delivered entertainment. But fame cuts both ways. Critics accused Elite XC of protecting him, feeding him favorable opponents. Purists in the MMA community dismissed him as a fraud, a sideshow dragging the sport backward. For Kimbo, the pressure mounted, and then came the night that changed everything. In October 2008, set to face Ken Shamrock, a last-minute replacement stepped in. Journeyman Seth Petruzzelli. In just 14 seconds, Kimbo was knocked out in stunning fashion. The myth cracked, Elite XC collapsed soon after, and Kimbo Slice was left exposed. It was the first major fall of his career, but Kimbo's story wasn't finished. His charisma, his heart, and his underdog appeal were too strong. If the streets built him and the internet amplified him, the next chapter would test whether Kimbo Slice could survive in the world's toughest proving ground, the UFC. When Kimbo signed with Elite XC, he became their crown jewel. Television executives plastered his face across networks, interviews, and late-night talk shows. His fight with James Thompson in 2008 became one of the most watched MMA bouts in U.S. history, pulling in over 7 million viewers. For a moment, it looked like Kimbo had cracked the code. He wasn't just a backyard fighter anymore. He was the fighter people wanted to see. But success can be fragile, and Kimbo's empire was built on a shaky foundation. The cracks showed in October 2008. Kimbo was scheduled to fight Hall of Famer Ken Shamrock on CBS, but hours before the event, Shamrock withdrew due to injury. Scrambling, Elite XC slotted in journeyman Seth Petruzzelli as a last-minute replacement. On paper, it seemed like another chance for Kimbo to shine. Instead, it became a nightmare. 14 seconds after the opening bell, Petruzzelli landed a short right hand that stunned Kimbo and dropped him flat. The crowd gasped. The myth of the untouchable street king was shattered in an instant. Millions who tuned in to watch their hero saw him crumble under the bright lights. Overnight, critics pounced. The YouTube fighter had been exposed. Worse, controversy followed. Petruzzelli admitted in a post-fight interview that promoters had encouraged him to keep the fight standing, which sparked accusations of fight fixing. Though no proof ever surfaced, the damage was done. Sponsors pulled back. CBS dropped Elite XC. Within weeks, the entire promotion collapsed. Kimbo wasn't just a fighter who had lost. He was the face of a failed company, a man many said was finished. The critics declared his run over. For most, that would have been the end. But for Kimbo Slice, the fall was just another chapter. He had come too far, built too much. He wasn't walking away yet. Dana White, the UFC president, had been one of Kimbo's harshest critics. He once joked that Kimbo couldn't beat a good amateur, dismissing him as a circus act. And yet, in 2009, White made a surprising move. He invited Kimbo to appear on The Ultimate Fighter Heavyweights. The reality show was known for reviving careers and launching stars. And White knew one thing for certain: Kimbo meant ratings. When Kimbo walked into the TUF house, the other fighters saw him as a target. He was the celebrity, the one who didn't belong. Some mocked him as a fraud, but inside those walls, Kimbo showed something no one expected: humility. He didn't strut. He didn't talk trash. He trained, listened, and tried to learn. His willingness to put ego aside won respect from fans and teammates alike. In his first fight, Kimbo was matched against veteran Roy Nelson. Nelson, a grappling specialist, smothered Kimbo on the ground and won by TKO. Critics again claimed Kimbo was exposed, unable to handle the technical side of MMA. MMA. But for fans, something different stood out. Kimbo never quit. He fought through exhaustion, fought through frustration, and kept pushing. That resilience earned him another shot. After the show ended, Kimbo officially signed with the UFC and stepped into the octagon against Houston Alexander in December 2009. In a grueling fight, Kimbo outworked his opponent and secured his first UFC victory. The crowd roared, not because he was perfect, but because he proved he belonged. Though his UFC career was short, losing to Matt Mitrione in his next fight, it cemented Kimbo's reputation as more than a gimmick. Fans saw a man who came from nothing, took every shot the critics threw, and still climbed into the cage to test himself against the best. That kind of grit couldn't be fake. It was real. It was Kimbo Slice. By 2015, Kimbo's UFC run was over, but his star power hadn't faded. Bellator MMA, hungry for ratings and attention, signed him to a multi-fight deal. Immediately, the nostalgia kicked in. His first Bellator fight was against Ken Shamrock, finally delivering the matchup fans had been waiting for since 2008. The fight was chaotic, scrappy, and far from technical brilliance, but it was pure entertainment. Kimbo rallied and scored a first-round TKO, proving that even years later, he could still draw millions to their screens. Then came, perhaps, his most infamous bout against fellow street fighting legend Dada 5000. Marketed as a clash of Miami backyard kings, the fight devolved into one of the most bizarre spectacles in MMA history. Both men were exhausted almost instantly, stumbling through the cage. In the third round, Kimbo won by TKO, but Dada was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening complication. The fight became infamous, but it also reinforced one truth. Win or lose, people would always tune in to watch Kimbo Slice. He had one more fight scheduled, a rematch against James Thompson. But before it could happen, tragedy struck. In June 2016, just weeks before the fight, Kimbo was hospitalized in Florida. His heart had failed, a result of underlying health issues. Days later, he passed away at just 42 years old. The MMA world was stunned. Fighters, fans, celebrities, everyone paid tribute. Dana White, once his loudest critic, called him a fighter with an incredible following. Bellator President Scott Coker praised his heart and charisma. Fans around the world mourned, not just for the fighter, but for the man who had become a symbol of grit, humility, and survival. Kimbo Slice didn't die a champion in the cage. He didn't need to. His legacy was carved in the millions he inspired, the barriers he broke, and the myth he built from the streets of Miami to the bright lights of global arenas. He was proof that you could come from nothing, fight through everything, and still leave the world talking long after you're gone. To millions of fans, Kimbo Slice was the bearded street king, the unstoppable brawler who terrified opponents with sheer presence. But to those who knew him off camera, Kevin Ferguson, the man behind the myth, was something entirely different. He wasn't a thug, a gangster, or the caricature that critics sometimes painted. He was soft-spoken, respectful, and deeply devoted to his family. Friends and teammates often said that the real Kimbo was almost shy. At American Top Team, one of MMA's toughest gyms, young fighters were stunned to discover that the intimidating internet legend they grew up watching was humble, eager to learn, and never acted like he was bigger than anyone else. He'd help clean mats, run drills without complaint, and ask questions like a student rather than a celebrity. Outside the gym, Kimbo was a father of 6, fiercely protective and proud of his children. He once said that everything he fought for wasn't just for fame. It was to provide for his family and give his kids opportunities he never had. In interviews, you could see his entire demeanor change when talking about them. The scowl faded, the fighter disappeared, and the father emerged. That duality, the terrifying fighter and the gentle man, was what made Kimbo Slice so magnetic. He wasn't trying to be anyone but himself. He admitted he wasn't the most technical fighter, admitted he came into MMA late, but he never made excuses. He simply showed up, worked hard, and fought with everything he had. For fans, that authenticity was everything. In a sport often full of trash talk and staged bravado, Kimbo didn't need to play a role. He was real. And that's why people who never watched MMA before tuned in to see him fight. Kimbo Slice wasn't just a fighter. He was a man who carried his humanity into every arena he entered. By 2016, Kimbo's career had taken him from viral fame to the UFC, then to Bellator, where he was still one of the sport's biggest draws. Even in his 40s, his name could pull television numbers most champions couldn't match. But behind the beard and the power, his body was wearing down. Years of fights, training, and the heavy weight of his frame were taking a toll. There had been warning signs. His fight with Dada 5000 at Bellator 149 was one of the strangest in MMA history. Both men looked exhausted within minutes, stumbling through the cage as if every breath was a struggle. After the fight, Dada nearly died from kidney failure and dehydration. Fans wondered if Kimbo too was hiding health problems. The truth emerged months later. Kimbo was scheduled for another big fight, but during training, he collapsed. Rushed to a Florida hospital, doctors revealed he had heart failure and needed a transplant. Just days later, on June 6, 2016, Kimbo Slice died at the age of 42. The fighting world was stunned. The man who had seemed larger than life, the street fighter who became a legend, was gone. The outpouring of grief was immediate. Dana White, who once mocked him, said Kimbo fought with his heart and had an incredible following. Bellator president Scott Coker called him a beloved member of the Bellator family. Fighters, celebrities, and fans across the globe paid tribute, not just to his fighting, but to his journey from the streets of Miami to the biggest stages in combat sports. Kimbo's sudden passing forced fans to confront a painful truth. Beneath the myth, he was still human. His heart, the same one that pushed him to fight and provide for his family, had finally given out. But in death, just as in life, Kimbo's story resonated. His legacy wasn't in titles or records. It was in the millions of people who saw themselves in his fight, who believed that if Kimbo could rise from nothing, maybe they could too. Kimbo Slice's career defies easy labels. He wasn't the most technical fighter. He never held a UFC title. His professional record won't stand beside the sport's greatest champions, but ask fans who mattered most to them, and Kimbo's name will come up again and again. Why? Because Kimbo Slice represented something bigger than fighting. He was the bridge between two worlds, the raw chaos of street brawls and the sanctioned order of MMA. He brought millions of new eyes to the sport, people who had never watched the UFC before but tuned in for Kimbo. In that way, he expanded MMA's reach more than many champions ever could. His fights were spectacles, yes, but they were also events that united fans from all walks of life. More importantly, Kimbo's story was about survival and transformation. He showed that you could come from poverty, from nothing, from the chaos of the streets, and still carve out a place on the world stage. His rise was proof that grit and authenticity mattered as much as skill. For every fan who tuned in, he was a reminder that greatness doesn't always look polished. It can look raw, messy, and real. His legacy also lives on through his family. His son, Kevin Ferguson Jr., better known as Baby Slice, followed in his footsteps, competing in Bellator and carrying the name forward. Every time Baby Slice enters a cage, the echoes of his father are there, the same fighting spirit that turned a man from Miami into a global phenomenon. Today, Kimbo Slice is remembered not as a flawless fighter, but as a cultural icon, a pioneer of viral fame. A man whose fights brought people together, a father, a friend, and a legend whose impact reached far beyond the cage. His story is both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder that even the most unlikely fighters can leave the deepest marks. Kimbo Slice didn't just fight in backyards, he fought his way into history. And though he's gone, the myth of Kimbo will live forever in the hearts of fans who believed in him, flaws and all.